Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Scott Jordan, founder of the Alternative Finance Network. Thank you very much for joining me today, Scott.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, David. I've been following your publication. You guys are doing a very nice job.
Hey, man, I really appreciate it. But before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Scott, I always like to start the podcast with a little bit of background. So how did you find yourself coming to cannabis finance?
I was in 2009, the dispensary I was a patient at was complaining one day that they couldn't get a loan to repair some needed equipment in their grow facility. And I saw it as a challenge, and I'm a guy that likes challenges. I've always been challenged my whole life. And so I said, let me see what I can do. And I was able to get him 50 grand. He was really pleased. He had many other, back then, before it was legal adult use, it was really a cowboy cottage industry of people that were in the black market before and decided, let me try going over to the white side and see, what it's like here, doing it legally.
So, I mean, obviously the your first experience in the industry was a positive one. After that, how did you decide, no, this is, we're going to keep going forward with this and try and improve cannabis finance?
It seemed to me to be the law was lagging behind where the rights of people to buy and obtain and grow marijuana were behind. And anytime you've got a gap like that, there's an opportunity there. I did it in telecom. I did it when I created a touchscreen kiosk business. You look for patterns and opportunities where there's a disconnect between reality and, the law or what the trend is. And so I've been a trendsetter most of my life and so decided to continue to set the trends. Plus, I felt it was really unfair. How can you allow someone to go into business, pay taxes, and by the way, higher taxes than a normal business would pay because of the 280E tax burden they have. So you're already being discriminated against. If you lose money, you could still owe taxes because of how 280E is set up. It's totally messed up is about the nicest word that I can say. And so I thought I could help minimize, eradicate, soften the pure penalty that marijuana business owners pay to serve patients that needed their medicine. Remember, at the beginning, it was all about the medicine. It was all about serving patients that needed marijuana for chronic illnesses. And so I decided to take up that cause with some other people here in Colorado, being that we were the epicenter, we were the first, and I think we did it very well. And now looking back in hindsight, 10 years in the rearview mirror, I think we had a very good rollout. And when you compare it to other states, on either coast, shall we say, but we'll let them remain nameless. It wasn't nearly as smooth and easy a process as I think we did it here. Hats off to the officials, that really helped make that happen, and the pioneers that helped make it happen. One of which retired, by the way, last month, Sunday Seafried. Hats off to Sunday for the work that she did in getting banking legalized or banking tolerated and, the banking moving forward without the help of, the Safe Banking Act, which hasn't been passed in 7 attempts, I think now. So I'll get off my soapbox.
No. That's the entire purpose is for this podcast to be one long soapbox. So let's roll into it. Have you been a medicinal user for most of your life?
Not most of my life. I had some lower back injuries. I played tennis at a pretty high level in college and after college. And Tennis is rough on your body. Thank God for pickleball. I really have picked up pickleball, and pickleball is now my preferred sport here. And I really like it. But yes, marijuana has helped me sleep better and helps me just, kind of relax. I'm a high energy guy, as you might be able to tell. And so it does help me.
Um, so after you started getting into cannabis finance, where were you working and how did you evolve through the industry to eventually setting up your own shop?
So I had a couple of bosses that we didn't see exactly eye to eye, but my boss said, you know what, I think this is something that's gonna, take off. I was working for a company called DFI, Dynamic Funding Incorporated, and I after getting the reception that I got from people that were looking for money and realized there was no money available. There was no bank loans. You couldn't find a bank. I mean, remember, I'm like in the prehistoric days of when you couldn't find a bank that would legally and ethically take your deposits. So it just progressed from there. So today it seems like nirvana, where you got 10 different banks in every state fighting for, the deposits. It's not as good on the lending side, but on the deposit side, you got plenty of choice and reasonable fees. When it first started, it was very high. It was like 35 basis points, I think, for a deposit, with the only guys that would take you in town that had a 9-month waiting list to be able to get in. And so, today being able to go to someone, pay no additional fees, get checking and savings, get wire transfer, it just seems like nirvana.
For those that were involved that early in the industry, what was financing like when operators didn't even have a bank account?
It was mom and dad and friends and family. That's it. If you didn't have rich friends and family that had money, you weren't getting into the business, period. No SBA, obviously, no USDA, none of that stuff. Even with the farm bill passing, at least you can sometimes, if you have the right banker and the right financials, get hemp financing. But, it was no financing available other than Hard Money Harry. And, I had one or two people that would, look at marijuana, and look at the financials. And thank goodness, sometimes, what do they call it? When preparation meets opportunity, people call it luck.
Right, right.
Lucky. I knocked on enough doors. I saw the vision. I saw that this industry was going to be needed badly. I knew it was going to spread after, what we had done in Colorado. You could just see that it was a, industry. You didn't have to teach people how to use the product. Okay.
True.
you know, and you added a whole bunch of products. When I first went into the dispensary in 2009, it was hand wrapped, you know, candy for edibles, and you had flour, and that was it.
Right.
That was it.
Hmm.
No more than that. And look at you got syrup, you got all these different types of products, all kind of infused products, and hemp-based products now. It's wild.
At what point did you start flirting with the idea of starting Alternative Finance Network? And, when did you really get moving on it?
So the company that Dynamic Alternative or Dynamic Funding Inc. They created a company called Dynamic Alternative Finance, just so we would have a separate company that did just marijuana in case something came down.
Hmm.
So that company got sold in 2018. I went to work for a company that promised a lot, delivered very little. And so after that experience, I decided, let me go out on my own. I know the network. I've spoken at a lot of these. I know everybody in the business because, we all started out very early on. And let me see what I could do here in helping people level up the playing field and providing other goods and services that were going to be needed to complete the finance suite that people need to run a business. It's not only loans to get started, but it's loans to expand, it's equipment loans to add efficiency into the operation, it's real estate so that you can build long-term wealth and have your customers basically finance your building. Why not own the building? That's how a lot of people, create wealth. They have their customers pay off the loan over a 20-year period of time. And all of a sudden, this asset that you bought maybe for 2 million bucks is worth 4 million bucks, and it's generating 50 grand a month in income. So, you've got residual income as well to be able to create your wealth. So I wanted to be part of that. And we're now actually working with a company that's got a payment solution that's available as well. That's very exciting. I have not really gone down the rabbit hole in that space. I just always have cash in my pocket, not, you know, hundreds, but enough to go to the dispensary so that I'm not having to pay 350 or whatever it is people pay, in order to be able to use an ATM.
Did you ever have reservations regarding going out on your own?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely, at my age, it's not something that a lot of people start, when they're 60 plus years old. And it would have been easy to go to work for someone else, but I thought the better part was for me to venture out, help educate people, help people that really need financial expertise, because this is now an expensive game to play. And it's easy to lose a lot of money. Someone said, well, if you were starting out, how would you make a little money in cannabis? I said, I'd start with a lot, because that's what you need, to be able to withstand all of the curveballs and the delays and the construction overruns and the tariffs now. Who knows what the effect, we don't know. It's March 30th, and we don't know what's going to happen April 1st, with tariffs. And, the economy, the economy now is looking not as robust as it was prior to the election. And, there's a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty is not good for business people. We like certain. Give us certain, give us the facts, let us know what the facts are, and so we can operate. But when you don't know Monday to Tuesday what's going to happen, it's quite concerning.
Cannabis in general has been pretty protected from other economic uncertainties. But do you think the current state we're in now could really shake it up?
Definitely is going to shake it up.
Yeah.
I'd love to, schedule another interview in 90 days, and let's talk about what happened between, in the good old days of March 30th to June 30th, or do it on my birthday, August 3rd.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some very well, if you read the tea leaves, you can see everything that's coming out. I mean, the DEA just announced, let's do a contest. I don't know if you saw this, but this morning, let's do a contest of anti-marijuana songs for 420.
No, I did not see that.
That's how bad it is.
Oh, wow. That is troubling. I mean, was that so? You recently went to NECAN.
Yes.
Is there a lot of similar sentiment out there?
The people that show up at those shows are generally optimistic and looking to do some business. They're not sitting on their back deck with a bong and a beer and, crying, oh, woe is me. There's opportunity. Anytime there's change, there's going to be opportunity. And I think there's great opportunity here as well. But I think it's going to come in different forms. And hopefully, we're going to get somebody in the administration, particularly in the DEA, to come to the fact that it's 2025. They're acting like it's 1925 in many cases, and their remarks are now a $30 billion business just in the US and expanding. One of the few expanding businesses and marketplaces where we still have what 20 states that are no what is it 14 states that are now not medically legal, and I think half the states, about 25, are adult use legal. But I mean, the way they're talking is not very pleasant to people that want to help expand the business. And, we're looking for relief from the SAFE bill and as well as the other things that Trump talked about, during his campaign.
What are those other forms of opportunity that you see out there?
Tremendous opportunity with software, with making things easier to account for. Tremendous amount of opportunity in accounting and finance, I think. Um, we're seeing a tremendous evolution here in the pre-roll, marketplace. We're talking to several pre-roll companies now. They're taking off like a hockey stick. Um, I think new products. I think we're at the first inning of, the baseball season, so to speak, which is coming up this week, I guess. Um, you know, I feel like, we're at the very, very beginning of the product innovation that could come about. And we've done no real legal research. That's the other thing is I'm hoping that the new administration is going to allow, the research to be done so that we can use this medicine to its fullest. I think we've just barely scratched the surface of what it can do for all types of diseases. I'd love to be around 100 years from now and see what science has done with the plant and medicinally.
When you're talking about the potential for pre-roll companies, are you talking about the equipment manufacturers that make the automation equipment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, at MJ Biz, it was like 7 or 8 of them right at the beginning. And then at NECANN, we had at least 4 that I saw that were
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Anything else at NECANN that caught your eye?
I had a lot of preset appointments, so I didn't hit the floor that much.
Mhm.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the vape industry, with Blink now going down. They had, I thought, some very innovative and attractive looking, devices. Be interesting to see what happens with Tilt now that their market cap has gotten to be, so low. I wonder, because that to me is one of the forms that is elegant, it's easy to carry, it doesn't smell, it's like the perfect thing for the soccer mom or the, you know, attorney to, casually allow adult use and not smell up a public area.
True. No, I definitely see a lot of opportunity there. Um, One thing that you had posted prior to the event, you said, I'm bringing my checkbook to NECANN and funding 5 companies. So did you?
I have 3 that I'm looking at right now. We didn't get all the paperwork in, but I'm optimistic that we will do that. And it was nice because it attracted apparently some people had seen that in addition to you, but people were saying, hey, can I get on the list? Can I get on the list? Yes. Yes, we have money available. What we did was when we saw the flux in the marketplace, we went to several of our larger, being in the business since basically 2009. I did my first loan for the company I went to work with in 2013 on the leasing side. But I've been in the business a long time, and so I know a lot of the lenders. And what we did is we had conversation with them and said, "Hey, where are you coming into 2025, the new election? What's going to be our allocation of capital?" And they said, "As long as you show us good deals, we'll have capital to allocate." And so that's part of I think what makes the alternative finance network a unique entity is that we have the experience with the lenders that perform, and we can show them where, as a borrower, where your deal makes sense and fits into their portfolio and the other companies that they've invested in or lent money to. And so it makes it easier for them to justify deals that are on the fence. The easy deals, the deals where, people are making a lot of money, which are few and far between, are easy to get done. But it's those ones that are kind of need a story, need someone to kind of massage it, a little bit and say, look, remember the deal we did 5 years ago? You were a little da 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 da. Now I got something similar, but it's better in this way and this way. I think you ought to, fund it.
I guess so. In your opinion, or I guess in the opinion of the people you work with, what is a quote unquote good deal?
Good deal is one where you have plenty of cash flow, 1.25 or better debt service coverage ratio, where you have strong guarantors so that if something does happen to the business, you get a government interruption, God forbid a 9/11 happened, or another, well, the pandemic really was good for, many retailers, but, you have something that interrupts the normal flow of business, that you have secondary ways to repay that debt. And that there's something on the balance sheet there that can be recovered in the event of a default. Lenders want three ways to be repaid as often as possible. And the more that you can give them those methods of repayment that they know is going to get them whole, the easier it is for them to lend. And all that's what it comes down to is a risk reward ratio. If you're unable to make payments because of your business, what's a secondary, what's a tertiary way for a lender to get repaid?
Given your extensive experience in the industry, do you have a really good barometer as to, who has a good chance of making it and who doesn't?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. Um, I can tell you within 2 quarters, maybe 4 quarters. The problem is the industry is so darn dynamic. It changes so much. Beyond 6 to 12 months is a guess at what's going to happen in the marketplace and how that company is going to be run, the executives that stay on with the company or decide to exit if they, were able to exit with a bunch of money or, what's I think is really interesting is observing what Nancy Whiteman is doing at WANA. She had a big $300 million score there, yet and she lives in not very far from me, here in the Front Range of Denver. She's up in Boulder. I'm down in Lone Tree, but really hats off to her as well for taking that kind of big one-time score and doing some good for the community. We see what WANA does in the community here, in the arts, in the music community. They're very prominent in donating to causes, and really think that that's something that more executives should be called to do, particularly not so much in cannabis because people haven't really had a lot of huge paydays. I mean, my buddies at Weed Maps had a big payday, when they went public, but that was in the good old days when you got billion and a half dollar valuations, and now, that's shrunk down. But with this, what would I call it? What would be the right word for it? With this glamorization of billionaires and the glamorization of excessive excessiveness. Okay. Excessive excessiveness. I said it first here on your show. Okay. The excessive excessiveness that billionaires display with no seemingly touch point with reality. No seemingly, like, if you have even $10 million, that's a lot of money. And if you even 10 times that have $100 million, can you really spend that if on yourself and consume that and use that money properly? Or is that really excessive excessiveness? And so I'd love to see more people like Bill Gates, that has his Gates Foundation, and do things for research for the common good, because it's just too much money. It makes you too crazy. And most of the time, when people have that excessive amount of money, it's usually not healthy for them. They're involved in vices, they're involved in other things that are not healthy. And I hope that more people would follow the example of what Nancy Whiteman has done at WANA and create a foundation, continue to work in the business. I mean, I just saw her in Vegas. She's attending a show, looks just like she looked before, the big event. And I think it's a great thing to do, and we're going to need more and more of that kindness, I think, in our society as we go through the next 4 years of what this administration is starting to do from the day of inauguration.
I think that the glamorization of excessiveness is the most accurate, but the nicest way that we've described our culture currently.
Excessiveness. That
It's
came from you, David. That was your. I love it. Oh.
One of the events that you had on your schedule at NECAN was the Jews and Weed breakfast. Um,
No kidding. They publicize that, huh? Where you go and what you do. That's funny.
well, I was curious, so what is the current state of Jews and weed?
There was great bagels there and great, some of the best salmon I've ever had. So I was really glad. I'm a big bagel guy. I'm not Jewish, but a lot of Jewish people were in the industry, here started out. A lot of them were real estate guys that now saw this as a real estate play because you had to be vertically integrated. So you're going to own your grow or rent your grow, from someone else. And most people that got rich realized better to own a piece of real estate that almost always goes up and always goes up eventually. It never really goes down hardly unless you made a bad buy. And so it was good. I met several people that I knew there, and it was a great kind of start off to the day because it was like only 2 blocks to get to the Heinz Center from there. So, I kind of got an hour in of some bagels and cream cheese and lox and salmon, and then went over and started meeting with people at the show.
No, very cool. It was just of the events that were on the docket. I was like, well, that sounds interesting.
I wonder how many other people would know that. How did you find that fact out? That
Actually, it was one of your posts. You had
Oh, was it?
mentioned,
Oh, okay.
yeah, you
Okay.
posted that you had attended the breakfast, and I was just like, well, what did everybody
That's right.
talk
That's
about?
right. My social media person. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Um,
Karen. Hats off to you, Karen.
Karen, you're crushing it.
Hey, okay. I've known Karen for 30 years or so. We met each other in the telecom business back in the 90s. And she's been with me the last 3.5 years. She claims she doesn't know anything about social media. We got ranked number one in the top 1% and the top 2% of LinkedIn on their SSI scores.
Oh wow.
So if she doesn't know about social media, man, could you imagine if we did know what we were doing?
Well, so that was actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about. It looks like you've found a fair amount of success on LinkedIn. Is it specific to that, or has it been across other social media platforms?
LinkedIn has really been the best. I mean, I've got over 10,000 followers there or connections, and people seem to read and like, what we post and put out there. And so we've really just focused in on that. A little bit of Instagram and a little bit of Facebook, but really just my personal stuff, on that. And so appreciate all the LinkedIn viewers and LeafWire as well.
Okay. Is how are things at LeafWire?
They redid their site, I think within about 30 days or so, and I think they're still kind of adjusting it and harmonizing it with what they've done, but seems to do well. And they're here in Denver, so it's always good connecting up with another Denver guy.
True. Getting back to just overall funding, if you had to, you know, I guess grade or rate the state of funding in cannabis, what kind of grade would you give it?
That is a really good question. I would say between a C plus and a B minus.
Yeah.
And the reason is because there are fewer lenders lending now because almost every lender in cannabis has suffered a loss. Almost everyone has a horror story to tell me when I pitch them a deal, and I haven't spoken to them in a while. But on the other hand, the ones that are there have changed their underwriting criteria, tightened it up, are lending only to better quality credits. And I give them credit for hanging in there, particularly in a world that is very gray right now and foggy and not really sure what's going to happen with cannabis in general. I mean, it's just with well, first of all, we haven't even talked about, one of Trump's highest enemies, which is the whole anything to do with DEI. That's what has grown cannabis in the last 5 years. It's been every state going with some kind of social equity, program. So I wonder what's going to be doing there. Just last week, he came down hard on Washington, D.C., saying that, he thinks that legalizing, marijuana has to do with some of the downfall of the city. And, it's only Monday and it's only, what, 10:30. I
Hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
we don't know what's going to happen day to day. I mean, it's a bit crazy um that there's so much, uncertainty right now. But there's
Do you,
always been uncertainty in the industry.
do you think there is a strong potential for that anti DEI sentiment to sort of uproot the cannabis industry?
I think it's going to have a negative effect. I
Yeah.
think that it's going to lessen people trying to get into the industry. I think that it just seems like a turn back to the 50s or the 60s with all of these different policies that are anti black, brown, indigenous people, people that are not white, heterosexual males have it tough. And we're at the beginning of the turnaround. And, it's concerning.
I mean, what could potentially happen to, social equity applicants, social equity operators? I mean, what kind of disruption could they be looking at?
Any of the government programs, any of the state programs, he'll make it so that if you issue any DEA money, he's going to take money away someplace else. We've already seen concerts canceled that were already scheduled. You're going to cancel a concert for kids to play in because it's got something to do with DEI. Um, I would not have predicted the draconian and dramatic changes that have been made in the federal government with wholesale destruction of departments and the defying of judges, the defying of seemingly any kind of law, the constitutional, the inspector generals getting fired without proper notice, bunch of things that are against the Constitution.
It is a very troubling landscape.
I mean, and no regard for judges and their, decisions. It seems quite out of control. And um, it's probably enough said about that.
Well, so other than that horror story, you said that everybody has a horror story in the industry. What's yours?
I'm sorry. Say that again. I was laughing. I didn't hear.
No, well, you said everybody in the industry has that horror story. What's yours?
I've been pretty lucky in that, other than a personal investment that I made that did not work out, um, I've had it pretty good. And I think that's because I've kind of stayed in my own lane in terms of financing, and by not being the principal, by being the intermediary, never really suffering the loss except for the personal one that I took. And having had a very good run here since, 2013 full time, I've been, I think, pretty lucky, pretty fortunate so far.
Was the personal one a dispensary?
it was a combination. It was vertically integrated business
Okay.
in California with some people I thought I knew.
Mm.
And, you know, it's different when there's money on the line.
There, it always is. I mean, and the amount of times you hear that in the industry, like you think you know someone really well, and then a fair amount of money comes into the equation.
Yep. See what happens.
Um, from the financing perspective, are there still bad actors on the financing side of the industry?
Oh, yeah. It's a lot. I mean, Chris Roglieri is, just an example, out of New York, out of Albany, you know, they, I had seen his scam run 3 times, and none of the 3 times did it turn out a happy ending for any of the prospective borrowers. And so I knew that one was going to end up in a very unhappy ending. And Chris is going to jail, from what I understand.
What was that scam?
Where you take an advance payment from someone in response to they need $20 million. Well, you set up $1 million in a reserve account, and that reserve account allows you to fund, and it's kind of the same story. Give me money now and I'll give you money later, but it's always too good to be true, with too low a rate to be true. And you know people are not going to lend you at 5% when the industry is lending at 10 to 12%, best cases.
Isn't that a pyramid scheme?
Yeah, you could call it that. Um, you could
Okay.
call.
Um, so talking about rates and terms, in your opinion, what are some good rates and terms that cannabis operators could be looking at right now?
Well, you really got to operate in 3 different food groups and 3 different buckets. And in cannabis, because of the losses that so many lenders have received, I think you have to take a look at a different type of approach and a different type of analysis when you're looking at bringing on money. And a part of that analysis, I think, should be how soon will you be able to show a return on the investment? What is the estimated return on that investment? And what's the downside if it doesn't work out? What happens, if you bought this big building and now you've got to build it out, or you bought this piece of equipment? And because cannabis funding right now is not long term, even with real estate, you might get a 5-year fixed rate, maybe a 10-year fixed rate, but not 30-year fixed, or not, long term, fixed rate, because the industry is too volatile. So I think you've got to be making your decisions based on a short window of time, 12, 24 months, 36 months max, but more 24 months. Does it repay in 24 months or less? Does it make sense? And realize that working capital and kind of nice to have money is going to be more expensive than it is in other industries, because of the combination of added risk, number one, because all these companies, only 25% of marijuana companies make money. And because of 280E, you got to more than make money in order to have money left after paying taxes. That's the thing that's very deleterious to being in the industry, is you could break even and you still owe money in taxes. So you could pay to go to work. And that's not a pleasant, you know, situation.
Well, given that situation, is it sustainable for any operator?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to make money in this industry. Um, Retail is difficult because you get no break on any sort of expenses, advertising, delivery, people, none of that stuff, only cost of goods sold. You really have to be a well integrated, vertically integrated company, and you've got to have an eagle eye on expenses, and you really got to hands on manage, the P&L and the bottom line.
Well, Scott, I really do appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise with the Cannabis Equipment News audience. But, is there anything else that we might have left out, or anything in particular that you want to make sure the audience either knows about yourself or your work with alternative finance?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, we are open for business. We have access to capital for whether it's equipment, real estate, or working capital. We have access to that. We're continuing to be optimistic and hope that uh, Trump will follow through on relief for the industry, relief with 280E. Um, we think that that would have a very, very, very positive effect. And I think we're, one executive order away. So, Donald, come on.
Well,
And yeah, and we hope that, people will realize we're going to need jobs now that we're eliminating all these federal jobs. We're going to need someplace to have some, jobs created. And, if we want to continue on down this path that that we've been used to here in the U.S. And I also hope that they'll do research on the medicinal benefits. I mean, I think there are tremendous amounts of medicinal benefits that are available that we have not studied, and that would be good for the world and good for people's healthcare.
When you're looking at financing equipment, capital equipment purchases, a lot of times, does it make sense, when operators are trying to streamline, become more efficient?
Yeah, because generally you're able to eliminate labor. I mean, take these, joint rolling machines. Instead of having someone at 15 an hour roll, I don't know, 30 doobies in an hour. You have a machine that does it for 50 to $250,000, and it's paid for, never quits, never complains, and it just makes a lot of sense. The ROI, you'll see ROI in 6 months and something like that.
No, that's one of the incredible things just because there hasn't been that scale of automation in the industry, that quick ROI is really attainable with a lot of equipment.
Exactly. And they're making it better and better and more cost effective. And yeah, the pre-roll guys are knocking it out of the park. And again, I think it's demand from the industry. The industry has demanded more pre-rolls. They're more convenient. They're easier. They're whatever.
Well, Scott, thank you again for taking the time. If people are looking for additional information, where can they find you?
www.alternativefinancenetwork.com, alternativefinancenetwork.com. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm Scott Jordan. I'm the less famous one. So you got to put in Scott Jordan Cannabis or Scott Jordan Denver. There's a more famous one that was on Shark Tank many years ago.
No, I mean, definitely recommend reaching out on LinkedIn. You're a great follow. A lot of good information out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hats off to Karen for putting together a lot of that. But yes, I'm glad you're finding my content worthwhile, and tell more people, like, follow, and subscribe, baby.
Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. All right, for Scott Jordan, founder of the Alternative Finance Network, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.